What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Reasonable Discussion Zone. I am your host, Matthew Smith.
Vincent Turner.
And we are going to get into topics today that a lot of people don't like to talk about. We want to get into topics that are controversial. We want to get into topics that need to be heard. And so
make you uncomfortable.
And very uncomfortable. Exactly. We want to bring those to you, and that's what this kind of whole platform is. So this is our first official podcast. You will see changes as we grow this and continue to expand, but we're super excited to bring this to y'all.
Absolutely. And input is always needed.
Correct. And we're going to kind of start off just give you all a quick real rundown on how the structure is always going to typically go. We're going to have a small segment that's going to talk about a little bit what's going on in the world. Then the next segment's always going to go into U.S. politics. And then our third one's always going to be some sort of big topic that's kind of just out there, what's going on, that really touches it. And it could be a world topic. It could be a U.S. topic, but it's going to be something that's really big. It's going to be detrimental to the main point of the podcast. So just kind of wanted to kind of run into, we're going to talk a little bit about Lebanon. Lebanon's been going through a lot of struggle. They had the Beirut mass explosion. We all know that it was a failure in all aspects, whether it was just the government or just the dock authority having that much of that product sitting in their storage is unexcusable, and it's literally going to cost them in the long run. Their funds, their dollar is already crashing before that happened. Now it's just continually just dropping day by day. I think we're going to see a country that's either going to need some sort of bailout, similar to Greece when Greece had that bank collapse. I think that's what I'm seeing long term. I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to do this. We're only 1 month from that explosion, and they haven't been able to really do anything yet. They don't have the funds.
Had the funds to clear area. As far as I understand, there's still people missing that they are believed to be alive that they can't reach because they don't have the budget.
Yep. Correct. Yeah, I think there's a couple humanitarian places out there. They're like using dogs to try to help and search through. Other countries have come together. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised on Israel. Israel has actually been really supportive, and I know they have kind of a past. But I've been really surprised at how much support Israel has done. They've been setting up medical camps all along their property line and saying, hey, you can bring your guys over into our country and we'll heal, take care of whoever's sick or hurt, because their hospitals are obviously completely overtaken. And then some of them were destroyed in that explosion. So they're already short. But I do see that we're looking at a country that long term we might see a different structure of whether, like I said, it be a Greece standpoint where it's a bank bailout and somebody buys it. The bank in Greece was actually bought up. 1/3 of it was actually bought by a video game company, and the other 2/3 were bought by some lawyers. And so it's so Greece is in like a really weird situation. So I wonder if that's going to be similar to what's going to happen in Lebanon. I would assume it's going to be more oil tycoons and things like that, because that's kind of the makeup of what they have. Also, what's going on in the world, China and India having a huge standoff still. It's been that way for the past like 30 years in the mountains there between their borders. The problem is it's starting to get to a point where it's no longer a standoff. It's not like the zone there in North Korea, South Korea, where there hasn't been any bloodshed. This is a zone where the bloodiest portion just happened just recently. I mean, they just had a huge altercation where people died. I mean, it was a small mini war. I mean, it was a legit attack on each other at this zone. And I think that's something that we need to watch. India and China are massive powers. A lot of people don't
look at it. Both are very nuclear capable.
Very nuclear capable, and that's the big worry. I mean, I know U.S. politics and U.S. hasn't really gotten into a huge discussion on it, but I agree. I mean, it's you got two nuke countries that it's getting a little tense right there, and they both are large.
Absolutely. And how does that affect everybody else that is aligned with them or around them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something you have to think of. But my big question is, you have them so far operating on a both written and unwritten agreement. After all this time, why haven't we come down, sat at the table, and decided, okay, this is ours, this is yours, to erase, you know, what could create conflict?
Correct. And I know that at least on our current structure, our current government structure, we put so much focus in the borderlines of helping Israel and Palestine. We've been so focused on like that border, which I do think that's another war that's been going on for a long time. And it needs to be, you know, we need to try to help it. But I feel like I agree. I feel like there should be some sort of way to bring that standpoint. I mean, look at South Korea and North Korea. They're not as bad as it was. I mean, yeah, there's still a little bit of a standoff. All right. He is upset. We were in the middle of talking about the standoff between North Korea and South Korea, how they were good. And then we were getting into the discussion of coming to the tables. I was just trying to jog my memory. But yeah, so I think, you know, the way North Korea and South Korea, how they have handled it, while it's still a zone, I feel like they've come to some sort of agreement at the table. And I agree. I think that China and India should do the same thing. I think that they have the ability to come to the table and said, hey, look, this is where we're going to draw our line, and they can kind of go back and forth. It might not be next week, but it's something that they need to at least approach, because this is getting to the point where it could be deadly.
How many times have you heard our older generation say fences make the best neighbors? You know, as long as there's some sort of established border, perimeters, guidelines, this is what we're acting upon, it's easier to you know, regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And until you have that, you can't have unwritten rules.
Yep. You're 100% right. Another standoff, we were talking about Greece a little bit and their economy. Greece and Turkey are having a huge standoff in Mediterranean, and it's over money. Of course, it's oil, the black money, the black gold.
Well, you know, that touches off into a lot of subjects as far as energy, things of that nature. And of course, that's big income for the economy. So, you know, they're going to fight for their share. Each country is going to fight. And to tell you the truth, you know, when one country basically takes heat and says this is ours, and another country is like, whoa, you know, hey, whoever said this is yours, you know, again, you have no boundaries. You have what are called perceived boundaries. And now, you know, that there's money to be made, it's an issue.
Yep, exactly. And so, yeah, it's very similar to how we handle our maritime, you know, our ocean border. You know, we've come into some sort of agreements with Mexico and Canada on like, hey, this is where ours ends, this is where yours begins. We've set this up, you know, back in the 90s, I think it was, 90s, or maybe it was late 80s. But that discussion's already came because we know that was going to be a conflict at some point. Same thing with the Mediterranean Sea. It's never been discussed exactly where these borders are. Greece and Cyprus said, hey, this is where our border is. But the other countries never said, oh, you know, I don't think that's where, you know, they never said anything. But as soon as oil started happening, so as soon as oil drilling started happening, and they're like, wait a minute, there's a lot of oil in that area. Oh, no. Yours is closer, or yours is not. That's not yours. You know, so, I mean, I get where Greece is like, hey, we need the money. We're hurting. And then Turkey's like, hey, wait, there's a lot of money over there. That's ours. You know, that's not yours.
And, you know, I'm a firm believer in fair exchange is no robbery. So, you know, I think both countries could definitely grow and benefit from this. But, I mean, of course, no one's going to see it like that. Greed it's been a long time killer of friendships and relationships.
Yep, that's 100. That's so true, so true. But that's kind of a wrap up on what's going on in the world. Just a brief overview. I will say that, guys, as we get into these more and more, we will kind of have a more of a set structure on exactly how things are going to go. But this is a general basis. So I thank y'all for tuning in so far. We're going to take a quick little break. And then after the break, we'll get into U.S. politics. So thank you for joining in so far. If there's a certain topic you would like to hear, please send us a message or drop a comment below the video. We would love to hear it.
Welcome back to the Reasonable Discussion Zone. Again, I am Vincent Turner, and I'm here with
Matthew Smith.
And we're about to move into the section of U.S. politics, something that's very hotly debated and very contested hotly. Of course, we know our presidential campaigns on one side. The Republican Party has Donald Trump and Pence, and the Democratic Party has Biden and Harris. However, there are some other parties that are involved. Matthew, who do you got there?
Yeah, so we have the Libertarian Party, which is ran by Joe Jurgensen and Spike Cohen. They probably have the highest following of all the independent parties that are out there. But guys, we just want to let y'all know that there are other parties out there. So if you're not fully sure or aware of where your alignment is, whether it is Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian, there are other parties out there. So there's the Green Party, which has been around for a while. Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker are currently running that ballot. We have the Alliance Party, which is also known as the Reform Party. They've been around for quite a while as well. You have the Socialist and Libertarian Party, or Liberation Party, I mean. You have the Constitution Party. You have just other independent parties that are random independent parties. And then you have the Birthday Party.
Tell them about the Birthday Party.
About Kanye West.
Kanye West.
Ye for president. So there are multiple parties out there for everyone and everybody's views. Just go on nowadays you could just go on Wikipedia, you could pull up all the parties, and it will tell you where there are available ballots in your state. So even though there are all these other parties, they might not have made it on all the ballots. Just for instance, the Green Party, they've only made it on 31 ballots. And plus DC. So they have a potential of 392 electoral votes. And that's still huge. I mean, that can still, let's say they did win all of those states, which not saying that, it's going to happen in our current political structure. But if they did, that could be a huge turnover on a voting standpoint, especially as a Republican or a Democrat, or even the Libertarian Party, who expect to get the bigger votes.
And what it could do to other parties and their numbers, it could turn out to be a huge effect on the election.
Mm-hmm. So, like I said, I want you to all, there's tests out there you can dig, go online, figure out where you truly stand. Look at everybody. Don't just feel that you always have to vote Republican or Democrat and you feel like you're wasting your vote if you go anywhere else. That's not true. Your vote can change the dynamic and makeup of what we currently run through as a government. And
if you're not voting, you're not involved. Do you really have a say if you're not voting? I can't tell you how many people I hear that have voices and opinions, but are not registered to vote and have not voted.
No, 100% agree. But going into some of our politics that we have currently going on, one of the big ones that's been all over the news recently, it's been pushed out by the Democratic media, and it's also been pushed out by the Republican media. Trump's opinion on death and war, that's popped up again.
He says he did not say, but the media is going to double down and say that he absolutely did say it, and they're going to try to hold him accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is this even relevant? How long ago did that happen? Are we trying to speak of his character, or is it going to affect what we're doing here in this country?
Yeah. And so what we do know is it was something that happened in France in 2018. So it's 2 years ago, which still within his presidential run. It was something that was said to the World War One memorial, basically saying that in a very short gist that they were weak and losers. And while I don't know if that's what he meant, that's what was said. And he basically is being kind of called out for it now because of the presidential election. I do think that, Democrats probably pushing that hardcore. I know Biden's said his piece on it. My personal opinion is, this has just been in general in the politics, your voice on military and how military things happen, I feel should only be debated whether you have an input because you have experience in it. And while I'm not a huge a personal supporter of Trump in per se, but he has never served in the military. So I always kind of get upset when he gives his personal opinion on things when he has people behind him that have all this knowledge that he could use that he's constantly ignoring. So I on a personal standpoint, I'm not a huge fan of when he voices his opinion on those types of topics.
Okay, but speaking of huge fans, okay, and my perspective, I'm not a fan of either side. Tell you the truth, I'm just going to be honest and put it out there. I'm not a Biden fan. I'm not a Trump fan. I think what this election comes down to, and a lot of people are thinking, it's the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
What is going to be the lesser of two evils? Which is, I think, is going to come down to running mates.
Mm-hmm.
I think running mates are going to play a big role in this election. And as far as mail-in ballots, and I know that a lot of pro arenas now are starting to open up their facilities so that we can have in-person voting and spacing issues addressed. But you still have Democrats who want the mail-in perspective, and of course you have our president saying, well, hey, let's test that theory. Everybody vote twice, mail-in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, let's commit a crime
to
prove my theory.
Yeah. And the mail-in ballots, I think, are in the long run, I think are going to end up being very similar to a recount vote that happened in Florida. The whole makeup of how we're having this backlash already, and voting hasn't even started. We got about 2 months. We got about 2 months away before voting starts, and we're already having an issue with it. We're already having a backlash and pushback. So that just tells me already there. It's very similar, very, very similar to the makeup of some of the other revotings we've had. I think that's going to become a topic.
Let me ask you a question, Matt, and not try to catch you off guard, but how long before the mail-in voting, with the controversy involved, can he declare martial law and stay in office? Because the Democrats are saying that's a plan. That's a plan.
Mm-hmm. That has been discussed actually probably for the past 2 years. A lot of at least on the Democratic side, they've all felt that he's not going to let go of office. He's going to find some way to stay in office. Whether I believe that's true or not, I don't have a personal say on whether I think he wants to do that. But he's unpredictable. He's an unpredictable person. So I agree that would he do it? He could easily do it. He has this kind of uncontrollable urge that if he feels he's being wronged and that he's not getting his current way, he will make things happen and he will do it. And if he does, I am dreading the result of that, because I think any sort of standoff on that aspect could potentially lead to a mass battle, if not war, within the state.
100% agree. But I do think that it is something that needs to be watched, because it is something that a lot of people aren't understanding. It could happen. Mm-hmm. If the ballots are not counted in a timely fashion, then he can declare martial law and stay in office. There's been reports that say that he is going to leave if he's defeated. There's been reports saying that he is going to fight to the bitter end, that he doesn't want to leave. I can say this, never, and I'm not old. I don't want to divulge my age, but I've never seen a more controversial president in my life,
Mhm.
whether bad or good. I mean, he's opinionated, he's out there, and you have some people that are just, I believe in what he says, and you have some that says, man, if he told me it was raining, I'd open the door and check. You
Yeah.
know, it's just,
Yeah.
I've never seen a president more controversial.
Yep. And I know that just from in discussion of where I'm located geographically, I know that I have had a lot of discussion back and forth with a lot of people. And one of the discussions has been, like for at least on standpoint of the Republican side, they feel the Democrats are going to steal this election. And they say, and by stealing, they think through the mail-in ballots that's going to be, they're going to steal it this way. They're going to use social security numbers that are not real, and they're going to use people that are dead, and they're going to use the illegal immigrants. They're going to find a way to get them to vote, and all this stuff is what I continue to hear. But that's not any different than any previous election. I mean, that comes up almost every election. Social security numbers being used, illegal immigrants being used. I mean, that's been a discussion and an issue for a while now. So I don't think it's
As
any
a matter of
different.
fact, I just saw an article where I believe it was Michigan. They said they found 18 or 19 mail-in ballots of people who were already passed, deceased. So I mean, it happens. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. I'm not naive. I mean, but right now, what can you do with the country being in the state that it's in with this pandemic? I mean, what can you do?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we trust our procedures that we have in place, or I mean, what we do. But I do know this, that I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to vote. I'm definitely going to vote. I'm going to do my part. But I'm not a fan of either candidate. If I had to be honest, I'm not a fan of either candidate because I believe both sides are going to push their agenda, and neither of their agendas are going to help me or serve me.
Yeah, yeah,
You
and
know,
I will agree with you. Like I said, me and you have talked, and I'm not a fan of either one as well. And one of the things that I look for in a candidate is somebody that's not only going to help me, but give the power to the local government that they need to be able to be successful, because that's where it's truly reflected. It's reflected on a local standpoint to yourself, and then it's reflected on a national standpoint to the world. So what the world sees is a national standpoint, but what directly affects us is our local. And so depending on what the higher end does and what power they give to the lower end depends on how it's going to reflect on the long run on us. Now, of course, obviously, lately in the past few elections and the past few presidencies, there has been a lot more, executive orders. I think more executive orders were signed in the last two presidents than ever in history. I mean, Trump alone has blown that out of the water. Obama did it very, very frequently. So I will say that our structure as a presidency has changed a little bit. But ultimately, that's what I look for in a president, somebody that's going to give to the, what are they going to give to the local government that's going to make it to where they can do their job to make sure that it aligns within whatever I believe.
And I'm so glad that you said that, because now, and I don't, I don't perceive anyone to be unknowledgeable, but I do need people to understand that it starts with your local government. The president he does what he does, but that doesn't primarily affect you as an individual. That comes from your local government. Mm-hmm. So how involved are you in your local government, and what power is given to that local government by your president? Mm-hmm. So not only the presidential race, but you need to be involved in, if you're into politics, or you say that you're into politics, it can't just be when the presidential election comes along. It has to be when your local elections, your senators, your governors, your mayors, get out there and be proactive, because if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I know that's an old saying, but it's so true.
So true. So true. And it goes on to say that even if, let's say, for instance, we have everything going on with COVID-19, you can't go out there and you can't go campaign or whatever it is. Just do research, just the research of understanding your local structure. A lot of local governments, while they say they're, nonpartisan or they're, non-biased as a government locally, does not mean that the candidate that's running is not biased. I mean, we all have our own biases. Everybody has an opinion. I mean, that's what's so great about being an American. We are allowed to have this opinion. And so us having that opinion and being so opinionated, everybody that runs has some sort of bias. You just have to figure out, does it align within your views? On that standpoint, I briefly would like to touch on some of the things that we've seen just in our current president. You know, I know there's been some things that he's been pushed forward recently. One of them being the changes of what he feels are wasted dollars. And while I agree that our government overspends drastically, he has not really helped in that standpoint. And one of them he's cutting the training. I'm sure you saw this on the white privilege, the research into the white privilege and what that is. And he believes that it is it's more of a racist viewpoint, and he's trying to get that out of his market or his campaign.
And I'm going to tell you from my aspect, you know, I can speak from, I can't speak for the entire Black community, but I am Black. And I think white privilege is something that absolutely exists. It absolutely exists. And I'm not saying that anyone is wrong for using it, or who has used it is absolutely wrong, but it does exist. And basically it opens doors that may not be open to somebody else. And I'll give you an example. For instance, my degree is from the University of Michigan. The reason I chose that degree is because I was under the understanding that if you slide 2 degrees up under the door, people would favor the degree from Michigan. It would mean more. Okay, so everybody is looking for an advantage, and they're not necessarily wrong for using that advantage, but it does exist. And the first thing is to acknowledge that it exists.
Yep.
Things that may be available to you may not be available to me. So does that mean I have to work harder? Hey, then that might just be what I have to do. But we have to acknowledge and understand that it does exist.
Yeah. And I feel like this is one of those controversial topics that we've talked about. It's something that 100% has existed my whole life. You know, and while me and you, we've been able to discuss a lot of things. A lot of people don't know, you know, my background. I come from a very poor background, very, very poor. And where I currently grew up, I was one of the very few families that were white in my neighborhood. And I got to see a lot of things happen to my friends, to my brothers. And I saw things that they had to go through and the difficulties that they went through that I didn't have to worry about so much. And it's crazy because we both had roughly the same incomes. We both had the same household. We both had the same basis and makeup. Now, I will say that, you know, I did work hard. I mean, I have worked hard my whole life. That's never been anything different from anyone else in America. I don't think, I mean, yeah, there are lazy people and that's everywhere, but I feel that no one just goes around thinking that like, oh, I'm not going to try to get out of this situation. There's no one that just sits in the ghetto or in the hood or in a trailer park and just goes, man, I want to live like this my whole life. There's not one person I've ever met that says that. But the problem is there has been this stigma that hasn't gone away. I mean, I was awarded opportunities before anyone else in my area, and it happened time and time again. And I see it even on when I got into as I was working. You know, I was promoted into situations where there was guys had way more experience than I did, but they were always overlooked. And they weren't white. You know, they were either Hispanic or Asian or Black. I mean, they had just as much knowledge, if not more knowledge, in some of the situations that I got promoted on, just because I think of my color of my skin. I don't think it has anything to do. I mean, obviously my persona comes off that way, but I saw people get passed over multiple times, and I think it's something that still needs to be addressed. And I feel like that training and that research never should end until we have tried to combat it. It's still an issue.
That's huge. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems today. You know, is that it's not acknowledged, and people don't even, it makes people uncomfortable to even talk about it. You know, oh, no such thing. Because I think the big perception is that, and I don't even want to say it's white people and black people. I think that when one side is winning, the other side feels that they're actually losing something. And for us to be this great powerhouse that we say that we want to be, we can't look at it like that. You know, sometimes I might have to take a step back so that we can all take a step forward, if that makes sense. You know, and that, again, you know, we're touching right back into, you know, like taxes, tax brackets, you know, the wealthy, well, I don't want to be taxed that much. Well, you're making more than everybody else. So yeah. Now, do you have a right to argue about what's happening with your tax dollars? Absolutely. You know, I understand that. And that's something that should be addressed. But there are so many things that I see to be addressed in this country that for us to be the powerhouse that we want to be, to say that white privilege is not a thing, sets us back. It sets us back.
Yep.
And it's bad.
No, I 100% agree. 100% agree. Well, guys, we're going to kind of end it here on U.S. politics. When we come back, we will get into the big topic of today. Super excited about that. I feel like that's going to bring a lot of shed of controversy and a lot of shed of insight from us. And I thank y'all for listening in so far. We're going to go ahead and, like I said, take a quick break, and we'll be back. Thank you. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please spread the word, drop a follow, and continue to enjoy. Thank you, guys.
All right, welcome back to the Reasonable Discussion Zone. Once again, I am Vincent Turner, and I'm here with my partner,
Matthew Smith.
Okay, what we're going to talk about now is, I think probably is going to be our hottest topic, our biggest debate, and that's the current affair in society, our basically war against police, as I put it, which is, I think, a touchy subject from when it comes to this, because for people that don't know our background, that's how me and Matthew became friends. We're both in law enforcement, and that's how we come to know each other. But I think you will find that our opinions are pretty neutral, or I would say fair. I would say fair is the topic, is pretty neutral and fair on this agenda, especially with our current headlines. Everything going on, Matt, you know, what do you think, especially of this latest tragedy? I'll call it a tragedy.
Yeah. So what I'll basically state is a huge part of this protest started on Memorial Day. You know, Memorial Day brought the death of George Floyd. It brought the discussion from Trump, who stated that this was a disgrace and that he was going to push for police reform. That was what we were looking at Memorial Day. We're in Labor Day. This is Labor Day weekend. You know, we're going into Labor Day, and it's the complete opposite on the topic from the government side of things. We have Trump, who's pushing this this scare agenda almost of you know, these protests, and so that's kind of how the makeup of all of this has been happening over this summer. But there's so much to go on that we could dive into, but we're going to try to keep it to a point of where we focus strictly kind of what's been going on this past year versus everything that's going on, because we could do a whole podcast on just that, guys. So going into it, as a law enforcement officer, you never want to see, you don't want death. No one wants death in the line of duty. You want to be, I don't mind being that officer that went his whole career and never had to kill someone. That's good. That's not a bad thing, you know? And
as a matter of fact, I should have prefaced this by saying, and I know people hate hearing this, but it's the absolute truth. Less than 1% of your police force is bad. Mm-hmm. And actually, we want them gone just as much as the public does. you know, because they give us a bad name and they make our job hard. You know, I wanted to go my entire career without ever having to unholster my weapon. I mean, that would be an ideal career for me, and
Mhm.
to actually be able to help somebody, which is why I got into it. And I know that you got into it because,
Yep.
you know, I've had the privilege of working with you and us being friends. But sorry, go on, go on.
No, no, no. I agree. Like I said, you never want to go your career ever going into that, and you hope that you never run into those situations. Um, but it is the character of the job. It is the makeup of it. You know, we know that we're going to go into situations where we have to, and it becomes very tough. It's very tough to do. It's very tough situations. The biggest thing is when we get into the excessive force and we get into the makeup of how we handle different races. And that's what this whole thing is about. That's what this movements that we're seeing, these marches that we're seeing, the protests. While we'll get into a little bit onto the protests and things, but all of it is around because we have failed as a whole, as a law enforcement as a whole, to address that 1%. We've talked about it. Some departments, as we know, have put in things in place to try to weed that out. But as a whole, we both know right now we can name one officer, two officers, three officers that never should have been officers, and they still shouldn't have a job. And that's what's so bad about the makeup of current law enforcement.
And I applaud you for saying that. And again, I agree with you. I hate to keep agreeing with you, but anyway, but I will say this, that I've heard so much, you know, well, we need to make a change. We're protesting. We're fed up. Well, what are you going to do? It's time to stop protesting, stop talking, and start doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I think I have the solution. I honestly do. You know, I believe other countries where law enforcement has had to have extensive training and college educations have less incidents, you know. So for one, I think there should be training. Like you said, everybody knows who that one officer is. That shouldn't be an officer. Okay, now whether or not, you know, George Floyd took fentanyl and overdosed, you can still say that the force was excessive with the knee on the neck. Okay, so here's my issue. This man has had 18 write-ups in the past for excessive force. So you knew what you were dealing with. So now if you continue to employ him, your supervisors are held responsible also.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hold them responsible also.
Yep.
Okay. Police officers should be forced to carry insurance. I know one of the force that we worked on, we had to be insured, you know, because that made me think, hey, do I want to jeopardize the livelihood of my family being sued over a dumb decision? So it made me think and make right decisions, I think, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I also will say this, as a police officer, when you hesitate, you're in trouble.
Yep.
You know, we don't get a lot of time to make decisions. You know, it's bang, bang plays a lot of times.
Yep.
So, you know, I just, my thing is, and I've been condemned by, and I will say this loosely, some of the Black community, because I take a wait and see approach. You know, well, let all the facts come out. Then let's make a judgment. And, you know, and I can understand their part, that it goes partly on past relationships and situations. I can understand that. But at some point, we have to be willing to have understanding and to move forward. You know,
Agreed.
if that makes sense.
I take a very similar approach, and I think this is more so because of being in law enforcement. You want to have the facts. At least if you're a good cop, you want to have the facts. And so at least when we go through our training, we're expected to hold ourselves at a certain standard, and then we're expected to research and investigate and make sure that everything we put on our reports are true. Because if not, like you said, we were bonded and insured as officers in our department, and we were responsible. And if we wrote anything that was false, we could be held accountable or liable. And so I agree. I've said this time and time again, being that my background in law enforcement was primarily training. That's where most of my focus was when I was in law enforcement. I agree. Training has been a flaw for a long time. The way our department used training was not at first was not a good way. I mean, it had been the same training for the past however many years that was just regurgitated every single year, and the same officers were just sitting there, and it was just a day off for them to sit there, drink coffee, and bullshit with other people. That's literally all it was.
100%.
So to think that the training that, and like I said, this is because I just know that other law enforcement officers that I've dealt with, and I know that are also my friends, there's a few of them that actually think that, oh, the training is perfectly fine the way it is now, or it's already, it's already doing, we're always making leaps and bounds when it comes to it, but it's not true. If you look at, like you said, other countries, there are other countries that put so much more preference into how they train you as an officer. Now, that being said, there are things that I believe on to add to what you think with insurance and training that I think need to come off of law enforcement's plate. And the reason is because the way we've structured things over the past 30, 40 years. I think mental health should not be addressed by law enforcement. I don't think law enforcement officers have any if we want to train them properly and we want to train them into enforcing the law, I think, yes, they should know how to handle mental health situations, but I don't think they should be the catch-all for mental health cases. We know in several instances of people that were arrested just because their family didn't know how to handle their mental health issues. Sorry. Didn't know how to handle their mental health issues. They had, I remember one guy, he had outbreaks, and his family would freak out and they felt scared. So they would call law enforcement, and then he would end up doing something because he was mentally unstable. And then the cops are tackling him on the ground, bringing him in. Next thing he knows, he says something and he's on suicide watch in the jail, so, and that happens across the whole country, the way we handle mental health. So I think taking that off the plate of training to where we still have to just, basic mental health understandings in our training, if we expanded it to a 3 or 4 year or a much broader training, you could still do mental health, but not put it to a point where it's our job to handle mental health cases.
Absolutely. There is a lot on the police plate, as you like to put it, that I put it, police plate, that should be taken off, because from the very beginning, we're expected to be lawyers, doctors, counselors, clergy. We're expected to be everything. And I think that's a lot for a police officer. But I will tell you that I was probably taken to the woodshed more on the Breonna Taylor situation than anything else. And, and that was something that, a lot of people were upset at me for saying that, well, we want the arrest of the officers. Well, technically, it was not the officer's fault. They served a no-knock warrant on the address that they had. Okay, so the person that you're upset with, and it was a tragic accident. It's a tragic accident, and that's what it is, in essence, because the officers went to the address that they were given. They served the no-knock warrant, and if I serve a no-knock warrant and a guy comes down the steps with a gun, I can't say that I'm not going to respond that exact same way, because I have an idea of what I'm looking for when I go in, and that's what I'm seeing. Now, the person who gave that address should have issues. Mm-hmm. That's the person you want to hold responsible, not the police officers. And I think people need to differentiate between the two. We want the officers, arrested. That was not the officer's problem. Correct.
And when we're going through our training, when we go through our current training, the way we handled it when we were in all our departments, you have to look at everything as a reasonable man. That's the current structure of how law enforcement is judged when it comes in front of a jury or things like that. And so with the reasonable man, they basically, you have to look at it as a third person. You have to look at it as a reasonable person. If I was in that situation and I saw this, what would happen? Now, of course, in our current thing, and I've heard the exact same thing, like, well, he was shot and killed and they weren't even at the right address. And so, it's slaughter the cops. I 100% agree that as a reasonable man, when you're looking at it that way, you're like, wait, they're not even at the right house. So, that was handled incorrectly. So the reasonable man theory is now flawed a little bit. And you're looking at it as it was a failure in law enforcement, but it wasn't the officers that failed. Like you said, it was whoever served that warrant for them to go. It was not handled correctly. That being said, doesn't mean that there's not situations where law enforcement makes mistakes. They make mistakes a lot. For instance, and we talked a little bit about it before we got on this, was Jacob Blake, the most recent big case that's been going on that happened in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is known to have some excessive force cases. They're not the worst in the country. One of the worst is Denver, Colorado. If people didn't know that, they now know. There's more excessive cases in Denver, Colorado than pretty much anywhere in the United States in most times. But we still don't know the full story. And so going back, there are points of it that I don't know yet. It hasn't come out. We haven't even got to the jury. We haven't gotten to the trial. Do I think every portion of that was handled correctly as a previous officer? No, I don't think that I would have handled it in the same situation that they handled it. But I am on a wait and see. I still want to understand what started the whole confrontation. We only know what happened from the recording to when the shooting happened, and we only know what happened verbatim from vocalists of what the law enforcement is saying, and then of course what their lawyer is saying. But we don't fully know until we get into it more and more. And it sucks that Kenosha, Wisconsin does not do body cams. I think that is a huge failure on that part of the department. And I think that might turn around and bite them in the end because they didn't have body cams.
Oh, it will. It's absolutely going to bite them. But I can tell you this, being a police officer, being in a similar situation, I have responded to a call where, we talked about it. It was suicide by cop, basically. A young man wanted to end his life, and he had told several family members that. And as I arrived, he began to chase me with a knife. Now he was a white kid, and me being a black man, him being a white kid did not even enter into the picture as far as I was concerned. It was just a young kid that I figured in my mind was hurting and needed help. And he chased me around the car for about 5 minutes with a knife, asking me to shoot him. And, I'm not going to shoot you. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to be responsible for that because I ultimately have to go home at night and sleep, lay my head down on the pillow. And I don't want to have to take a person's life, especially in that aspect where I know he needs help. He's hurting. Something's wrong with him. Now, if I have to take a life to save someone else's life, if somebody else was in jeopardy, that's fine. But that's what I signed up for. I signed up to, to basically protect your family, leave my family to protect yours. As a police officer, that's what we do. So I think in that regard, we don't get enough credit, as far as police officers. But I also think that, yes, again, going back, touching on something that we talked about earlier, there has to be acknowledgement of past transgressions. Yes, there are issues with race and people being treated different. That has to be acknowledged. And until you wipe out that and start new with people who see it like we're addressing it now, you're going to always have those issues. Mm-hmm. You have to address it. You have to get those. How many old timers have you seen? Just think about where we worked, and we won't say any names, but how many old timers do you see that stuck on the old ways that just made everything bad?
Yep. Yeah. And the thing is there was always that mentality of, even when we were bringing in the new training, we were, when that department was starting to kind of change how they were doing their training, there was always that like, oh, that's just how he always has been. And it's like, that's not okay. That's nothing about that is okay. What you're telling me right now. Yeah. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what do you mean that's how he's always been? None of that is prevalent to what we're doing now. It's not right. He shouldn't be allowed to do it. And as an officer, when you do address it, at least in my experience, you're almost attacked. And I don't even mean just by supervisors. I mean, you're attacked by other peers that feel that you're just this troll in their department and you're a nuisance. But because you're addressing a situation that's been a cancer to the department, yeah, you're looked foul upon. And I think that that's another thing that needs to be addressed in law enforcement in general. People need to understand that just because you're friends with somebody doesn't mean you're always going to agree with what they do. You know, I own a business. I have several employees, and I'm friends with a lot of my employees. I look at them. I want them to feel that they can come to me about anything, but I also know that at any point I might need to fire them because of something stupid that they've done or something wrong that they've done. And it's the same thing in law enforcement. Just because we're friends, just because, you know, I look at you and be like, hey man, you want to come out to the barbecue, does not mean that means you get away with whatever you want to do in law enforcement.
Well, I mean, isn't that the true definition of friends? You hold each other accountable. And if we're friends, I can come to you and say, this is wrong. Mm-hmm. And we can agree to disagree, and I can respect your differences, and we can discuss it like men. And at the end of the day, come up with the best reasonable solution. Mm-hmm. That is true friendship, you know. And I think it's a good and a bad, because going through that just like basic training in the military, you know, and you know, going through the academy, that bond, working with somebody, especially in a life or death situation, that bond is so tight. It's tight, you know, and because these people understand things that other people can't comprehend. It's easy for people to Monday night quarterback when they've never been a cop or been in any situation, you know, but these people understand, they get it. They understand what I'm going through. They understand my emotions, you know, and that bond is tight. Mm-hmm. But at some point, that bond needs to be monitored, addressed, and configured in a positive way. And I think that's something that we could possibly add to the academy. Hey, look, right is right, wrong is wrong. And if you see wrong, it is your obligation to address it. And everybody else should be mad at you because you're pointing out the elephant in the room.
Yeah. And there's a term that ultimately I cannot stand, and I hope one day disappears within law enforcement. But it goes back into what we're talking about. The term is called Blue Falcon, and it's been a term for a long time in law enforcement. It should not exist. A person, you know, and it goes back to even as we grew up as kids, you know, the snitches get stitches types scenario. It's very similar to what I grew up around. Snitches get stitches. That's what a Blue Falcon is in law enforcement. He's the person that addressed or put forward that information of like, hey, I saw this. Well, it gets around because the investigation starts happening, and then people start talking. They're like, oh, wait a minute. It was that officer that said it. They figure out who it is. It comes out. It's not like it's like hidden things. And so then that person basically gets shunned out of the department. He gets shunned out of his shift because he's the Blue Falcon, because he brought forward something that was a concern.
But the thing to me that is so crazy is, if you think about it, as police officers, aren't we all Blue Falcons? That's our very job. Yeah. to tell what we see. We tell on the public all the time, you know. So I think what happens there is it just becomes a my shit don't stink episode. You know, hey, since I've got on this badge, and you know what, the public is right in a lot of senses. I have seen police officers that were picked on in the neighborhood or beat up in gym class, and hey, this is my chance to get back. Now I got this badge and this gun, and I'm the boss, you know. And you see those guys, and you can point them out when you get to any department, and you're like, that guy's not going to last.
Yep.
You know, he's not going to last.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, when I was going through training, there were several officers that I remember putting in through my training that they shouldn't continue. And it was because I was noticing those things. I was noticing those exact traits of, this guy is in here strictly because he's getting the badge. He thinks it's going to gain him plethora of women, or even on the other side, women for men, or vice versa. But it's going to gain them this respect and this heroistic ideology, basically. And I started noticing those things. And if I started noticing those things, I red flagged it. I mean, when I was going through my reviews of whoever I'm training, the other problem goes back into the structure and the old time of things. Almost, I want to say 80% of the officers that I have red flagged, went through. They still made it into law enforcement because the supervisors overruled whatever I saw. And that goes back into being accountable, holding our structure accountable, handling our training even more structured and more tight. If we expanded our training to where not only were we training the officers that are currently in and new officers that are coming, but our supervisors are set in a way of whatever it is, and they might think that that's they might think that that's the only way to handle it. And so we need to understand that it's not just a structure of new officers. It's not just a structure of maybe some of the current officers that are in. It's a complete reform and rebuild, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be, and I don't want to take away from what we're discussing now, but there is a topic that eventually we'll have to talk about in the future. Defunding the police has always been this big topic, and I don't think we have the time to get into it, but it's not about defunding, and it's just my personal opinion. It's not about defunding. It's about restructuring. It's about a true reform and rebuild of law enforcement and how it's handled. And I think that's what people are missing.
That's why internal affairs was to weed out dirty cops. And if we can identify a cop that shouldn't be in the system, and we know he shouldn't be in the system, 9 times out of 10, it's going to prove correct. And it's a tragedy when it comes down to it later. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be addressed when it's seen in training, because like you said, training officers, I mean, what are they there for? What are they there for?
Yeah. Yep. But guys, overall, I want to thank y'all for coming in to the Reasonable Discussion Zone podcast. It's our first podcast that we've done. As we grow this and as we build this community, we want your opinions. And so we will be posting these not only in Facebook. We'll also be doing a post into YouTube. So you can watch this anytime you're driving, anytime you're listening to it. I also will be trying to transpose this into an audio only basis, to where you can listen it to you in your car, and on your way to work. We're going to do it right now. We're trying to do it at a once a week basis, and then as this grows, we'll grow it itself. So I do thank y'all for tuning in. Please leave your comments and opinions, because we would like to eventually start addressing some of those topics and concerns. We also want to eventually start bringing on people to do maybe interviews of either people from local government, people even on your state and upwards into the federal. Also bringing in experts, bringing in maybe someone that for instance, we were going into the coronavirus, maybe a scientist or a doctor that specializes in that, things like that. So that's stuff that we're hoping to look forward to. So I'm super excited that we're getting into this. I'm excited that y'all are here for the first podcast. It's nothing but up from here, but it's all because of you is the reason we're doing this. So
absolutely appreciate you and hope all is well. Blessings.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining in on the Reasonable Discussion Zone.